Hello and welcome to another American History video lecture by me, Mr. Dustin Brown. Today I'm recording from my home studio, aka my dining room table. Today's lecture will focus on the United States home front during World War I. Today's lecture will have three main parts. First, the idea of total warfare and the United States' response to its wartime needs and the impact on its citizens at home. Second, the U.S. government's role in limiting civil liberties during the war. And finally, the changes in American society for African Americans, women, and children. World War I was a major war. Millions of troops were sent into battle, and because of the sheer size of the fighting, total mobilization of each nation's population was necessary. Now, this idea of total war is a major focus of this component of the lecture. At the start of World War I, the U.S. barely had around 200,000 soldiers. With the introduction of the Selective Service Act, the U.S. military steadily increased its wartime numbers upwards of over 3 million soldiers. Not to mention having allies that still desperately needed American food and military products. It was absolutely necessary for the United States government to enact new, temporary bureaucracies with the purpose of directing its population towards absolute wartime efficiency. Efficiency was not new, as World War I arrives on the coattails of the progressive movement. Many progressive ideas were incorporated into the planning and organization of the wartime government and economy, most importantly, above all else, efficiency. One such efficiency was the use of voluntary wartime rationing. One new agency that was created during the war effort was the U.S. Food Administration, led by future President Herbert Hoover. The goal of the Food Administration was to reduce waste and to consume less food by civilians, so more food could be sent not only to the soldiers that were fighting, but also to those that were suffering from hunger throughout Europe. This, of course, was not only for humanitarian purposes, but also to stop the spread of anarchy, which Hoover described as, quote-unquote, the handmaid of hunger. As a part of total warfare, and because the U.S. was nearly 3 years behind the other countries' mobilization efforts, it was necessary for the government to institute tighter controls over the wartime economy. The first 12 months or so after the declaration of war was followed by a time period of major confusion by manufacturers, transportation issues, and a lack of proper allocation of raw materials, specifically the distribution of coal. The first new governing agency of major importance is the War Industries Board. Borrowing again from the progressive idea of efficiency, the WIB took control of a wartime economy and told companies what products they would create and how many of those products to produce. They also allocated raw materials and urged the elimination of waste by standardizing production. The War Industries Board proved to be successful as it helped to increase industrial production by over 20%. The second major economic agency is the National War Labor Board. The NWLB was created in 1918 and included 12 representatives from both business and labor. The purpose was to arbitrate disputes between employers and laborers and to ensure a reliable labor force during the war. Ultimately, the NWLB strengthened organized labor's position. It supported an 8-hour workday, equal pay for women, and the right for labor unions to organize and collectively bargain for benefits, wages, and their working conditions. In the years following the creation of the NWLB, organized labor membership nearly doubled and became much greater accepted in a country which previously did not accept organized labor. During the early 1900s, the best form of transportation in the U.S. was still via railroads. However, the railroad system could not adequately serve the nation's wartime needs. During the winter of 1917, there was a severe coal shortage throughout much of the nation. This was not caused by a lack of coal, but instead by the inability of the railroads to move coal to where it needed to be. The Interstate Commerce Commission recommended that the federal government take temporary control of the entire railroad system to ensure efficient operation. On December 26, 1917, the United States Railroad Administration was created. Changes to scheduling and general practices occurred, while over $380 million was spent on new railroad cars and locomotives. This was the U.S. government's first foray into nationalization of an entire industry. The purpose of the Fuel Administration was just that, to institute rationing on fuel, to control its distribution, and to ensure that the home front efficiently used its fuel so that the war effort could be adequately supplied. The major legacy of the Fuel Administration is the introduction of daylight savings time, which is coming up very soon. The rationale behind this was that during the summertime, the clock could be shifted forward an hour, in turn giving people an extra hour of daylight during their most active time of the day. Of course, the purpose was to conserve fuel that would have been spent on lighting one's home or business. The real savings of daylight savings time are still debated to this very day. A lot of people, in fact, say that because people are staying up later, they are actually using more electricity, therefore not really much fuel savings at all. And finally, the last government agency of note is the Food Administration. Now, earlier I spoke of the Food Administration under the leadership of future President Hoover and its voluntary rationing program. Another way that it also made efficient use of the food supply was by the suggested upkeep of what we call victory gardens. Now, the idea behind the victory garden is pretty much straightforward. It's a way of getting people to grow their own food in gardens. Now, of course, you increase the food supply at the home and you're going to assure an abundant supply of fruits and vegetables. Now, the use of propaganda and the term victory garden itself helped to create a sense of one's patriotic duty to help the total war effort of the country. It was very common for children to take an active role in the planting and maintaining of victory gardens. In fact, many schools planted victory gardens that children would often maintain as part of their regular classwork, as you can see in this slide here. Because of the size of World War I in terms of soldiers fighting, it was obviously a very costly war. During its short stint in World War I, the U.S. government spent over $35.5 billion on the war effort. Now, a question that is asked is, where did this money come from? 1/3 of the cost of the war was actually paid by various taxes, including income taxes. So as you can imagine, that meant both an increase in taxes and also cuts in non-necessary budget allocations, things like roads and schools and things like that. The other 2/3 of the cost was paid for by selling war bonds. Now, war bonds could often be purchased directly by anyone in the public or would often be wholesale traded on the stock market. They often came in a wide range of denominations, from something as low as $5 to something, well, as you can imagine, into the hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And the idea behind this is that you make them affordable. That way all segments of the population could afford them, so they could all become involved. And it was also accompanied with the idea of propaganda. It's your patriotic duty to purchase war bonds. One positive yet often overlooked aspect and benefit of the selling of war bonds is that it actually helped to reduce the amount of money in circulation, which therefore limited inflation, making goods more affordable for the average citizen. While on the subject of propaganda, the American war effort required the use of such propaganda. Its purpose was to inform, educate, and even persuade the American public that the war was justified and that all segments of population had its responsibility to help ensure victory. Now, to direct this campaign of propaganda, the government created what was called the Committee of Public Information, also known as the CPI, or the Creel Commission, named after its leader, George Creel. It brought together many top writers, artists, and movie directors to create propaganda that played on public emotion and on a sense of civic responsibility to ensure the war effort and to enlist public support against foreign attempts to discredit the U.S. war effort. And again, while on the topic of propaganda and public opinion, let's take a look at two major changes that were brought forth by the government during World War I. The first is the Espionage Act of 1917, and its purpose was to stop interference in military operations and recruitment and to prevent the support of enemies during wartime. The 1910 U.S. Census counted a total population of roughly 92 million, and of that, 14.7% were foreign-born. And at that very same time, over 32 million, or roughly one-third of the population, was either first or second generation of Americans. Now, if you think that many of these immigrants did not have ties of loyalty to their native country, then you are definitely mistaken. Most German Americans truly had divided loyalties between the motherland and their adopted country of the United States. Most opted for American neutrality. Because of fears over acts of subversion, this law was passed. Now, the second law that we'll look at is the Sedition Act of 1918, which was actually an extension of the Espionage Act. And what it ultimately did, it severely limited freedom of speech and expression that would, quote-unquote, cast the government or war effort in a negative light. It allowed for jail sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years, and even allowed the Postmaster General to refuse to deliver mail that met the same standards punishable by the law. Now, the Espionage Act has gone through many changes and is still in force. Just ask Edward Snowden. And the Sedition Act was actually repealed by Congress in 1920. Now, there was a lot of debate about the Sedition Act, especially with its limits on freedom of speech, hence the reason why it was repealed by Congress. World War I brought about the greatest change for African Americans since the Reconstruction period following the Civil War. With men leaving factory jobs to fight and an increase in war production, there was a demand for workers in the industrialized Northeast, Midwest, and American West. And what occurred is an event known as the Great Migration, in which 6 million African Americans left the mostly rural South and migrated to northern cities. This movement has had a profound impact on many African Americans, as now over 80% of their population lives in urban cities. Even though many African Americans were looking to escape racial prejudice of the South, many found northern cities to not be much better. A series of race riots and restrictions on where African Americans could live would occur in the post-World War I period. But with them came their distinct culture, including jazz music, which will ultimately greatly impact the social scene of the 1920s, especially 1920s and Prohibition speakeasy culture. Women also played a profound role in World War I, especially replacing male relatives who went to fight overseas. Many worked in the munitions and clothing industries, supplying soldiers with guns, bullets, and uniforms. Many women also served as nurses and in non-combat military roles as well, thus extending the acceptable role of women in warfare. World War I proved that women were more than capable of doing the same jobs as men and having an expanded role in the public sphere of influence. Male opinions of women were drastically changing. In 1920, women will officially receive the right to vote with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. This was due in large part to their successes during World War I. In summary, World War I brought many changes to the American home front. Because of the size of the war, it required a total war effort which brought all segments of society into the forefront. The role of the government was greatly expanded, and individual civil liberties were greatly decreased. Propaganda was used to influence the public, and African Americans, women, and children all had increasing responsibilities and changed lives. The Great War really had a great impact on American society. Thanks for watching, and remember, never stop learning.